FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today's 8/21/19. This month is rapidly coming to a close. If you were in the right place at the right time, investing in the right things, you did quite well. If you weren't, not so much. But there is hope. You can always change your behavior, change your outlook, change your beliefs, and do the right thing. Just email us, kl@kerrylutz.com. Love getting your emails. Going to an undisclosed leftist coffee shop in northern Palm Beach County, reading your emails and knocking back my double tall breve latte, which is a weird drink, I know, but I just got into it. And, well, I've been into it for years, but it's my drink of choice. Everybody has their own drink of choice. So send me your emails, kl@kerrylutz.com. Well, you know there's something wrong with education. The kids are not getting taught anymore, and what they are getting taught is just outrageous. You know, Jackie Mason, the comedian, said, when I went to school, they used to give us homework. Now they give out condoms. Well, there's one guy who's really responsible for this. Person I personally am not that familiar with, but this new book that's out, I am going to become familiar with it when I read this book. The name of the title is Debunking Howard Zinn, Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America. It just came out yesterday. The author is Mary Grabar, conservative professor, writer, speaker. She's written tons of articles for websites that you go to, like Newsmax and Fox News, all over. Hey, Professor Grabar, it's great to have you on. So, Howard Zinn, who is this character, and why should we be scared of him?
Well, Howard Zinn died in 2010 at the age of 87, but his books live on, and they sell more and more each year. He was a member of the Communist Party from the late 1940s to about 1953, and he's had a tremendous influence on American education. His A People's History of the United States has sold over 2.6 million copies. It's used in classrooms in high schools and in colleges. It's been adapted for elementary schools and middle schools. Teachers use downloadable lessons. They're educated with the book as well. So even if the student does not have a copy of A People's History on his or her desk, they have been exposed most likely to the communistic version of American history that Howard Zinn promoted.
Okay, so let's talk about that history, because we hear, constantly on the mainstream media, on these TV channels, America being slammed as racist, as exploitative, that it just took advantage of Africa, of various parts of the developing world, and totally misses the point and misses the positive history. And they always say, well, the founding fathers were slaveholders, and that's only partly true, of course, but it totally misses what the country was all about and why it was founded and its founding principles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Howard Zinn promotes the idea that the evil capitalists founded this country in order to enrich themselves, and in the process of exploited slaves, took land away from the Native Americans.
Committed genocide against the Native Americans, right? All these things. Women were slaves too. Howard Zinn says that he says women were slaves. Yeah, well, he's a little bit, so he's basically taken history and just distorted it and really kind of twisted it to his own ends to prove his own thesis. So when you look at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, these were really revolutionary, no pun intended, documents for their day. Now we just take it as commonplace. So they always point and they say, well, you know, you had the blacks were 2/3 equal to a white person. And that's how they just really slime the whole thing. There's a lot more to it than that, isn't there?
Well, yeah, actually, slavery was a worldwide institution. It's been practiced by all the religions in the world since time immemorial. It started long before the slave trade in the West. In Africa, it had been going on for centuries. Blacks were enslaving other blacks, their tribesmen. So this was nothing new. What is remarkable, though, is that the West ended slavery. So while we've got the abolitionist movement going in the early 19th century, when a British diplomat asks the Sultan of Morocco, what are you going to do about slavery? Are you going to get with the program and end it? The Sultan said, why would we do that? It's, it's as natural as as the air we breathe. Allah allows it, and why should we end it?
Hey, and that is a good point. Allah allows it. So when we look at Barack Obama's family tree, they were African slavers. So why should we believe anything that Obama says? Because he's the descendant of slave owners. And Kamala Harris, another one whose ancestors owned slaves. So what difference does it make whether you're white or black? If your family tree was slave owners, then you should be slimed the same, but yet it's not. So this is a convenient little device that the left has created to basically slam, white America. But the fact is, like you said, the term slave is Slavic, and whites have been slaves throughout history. And like you said, every society at some point or another has practiced it, and they're still practicing it in Africa today. The ruling, Arabic minorities in certain countries, they're still practicing slavery today. And we've been fighting it ever since the Civil War ended. I mean, that's what people, I guess, really don't kind of get about the whole debate.
Yeah, I point that out in my book because Howard Zinn says that the United States is the most racist place in the world, and the slavery practiced here was the cruelest in the world. He compares it to slavery in Africa, which was kinder and gentler, he maintains. But one of the things I point out is an article in the left-wing Guardian by a journalist who went to Mauritania, and he was imprisoned for a while, but then he, went and looked at the black slaves of the Arab masters, which has been going on for generations. And it's always been in that country, the light-skinned against the dark-skinned. And that is far away from the United States. I mean, it's still going on. And actually, when he was writing his book in the late 70s, it was published in 1980, it was still legal there. Mm-hmm. So while he should have been complaining about slavery still being legal in Mauritania, he is attacking the United States, that had abolished it and fought a war where nearly 750,000 American men were killed.
Yeah. And hey, not all of the founding fathers owned slaves. And in fact, the greatest thing ever, and I was at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, and forget her name. But anyway, she said that no Republican in America ever owned a slave, right? And, of course that's true, because the party was created to defeat slavery and to end it. And I had occasion, I was at a conference, just a one-day conference, and it was at the Union Club in New York City. And that institution was created to end slavery. That was one of its major reasons for being. created in the 1860s, I think before the Civil War, if memory serves me, or right around that time. And it's endured to this day. So that's a real racist white organization, isn't it?
Well, Howard Zinn would say so, but Howard Zinn, lies repeatedly and distorts history throughout his book.
Yeah, for sure. And so, what is going on that people get to make statements unchallenged, unverified, unvetted, and nobody ever comes out against it? I assume when Howard Zinn's book came out, it was very controversial, and there were a lot of negative reviews of it, illustrating the facts that he got wrong and that he really had no comprehension of American history whatsoever.
Well, yeah, one person did. That was Oscar Handlin, and he was a Harvard professor, a giant of a historian. I knew the late Eugene Genovese, who was a Marxist at the time that Howard Zinn wrote this. So he agreed with him politically, but he said he refused to review the book because it was so bad. So this is coming from a Marxist. The history is so bad, he refused to review it. And he told that to me in 2010, 2 years before he died. People on the left have slammed it, criticized it, not because Zinn's intentions were wrong. They agree with his political views, but because he shows that everything that's happened in the United States has been for naught. All the progressive movements have resulted in nothing. The Civil War, Reconstruction, the civil rights laws, blacks are still slaves, he maintains. Nothing has helped. So his view is sort of a conspiracy view, or that's what he presents. Right. And what he wants readers to come away with is the idea that this country, the government needs to be overthrown, there needs to be a revolution, and we have to put in place a socialistic form of government.
And, I was a big fan of the late comedian George Carlin, but he seems to have picked up a lot of Howard Zinn's anti-Americanism. Yeah, I will grant you that the system is rigged at this point, but not anything to do with the founding of the country and the Constitution. In fact, I would aver that it is due to us drifting away and from failing to pass on those values to successive generations, that it is a rigged kleptocracy now that we're all fighting against, and hopefully we'll get back to our roots. But George Carlin, obviously, this ideology, we go back to Obama, Frank Lloyd Marshall, Obama's mentor, Pops and Me from his book, Dreams of My Father, all of this, it seems to have been pervasive among these pseudo-intellectuals. And I'm just reminded when you were talking about a person refusing to review that book, reminded by the late Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who you could argue was a somewhat of a collectivist, but he said, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. And it looks like the left has kind of disregarded that now, that, like it's Alice in Wonderland, Alice through the looking glass. Words are what I mean. Words are what I want them to mean, and nothing more and nothing less. And that's kind of what they've become with facts. Facts don't matter anymore. It's only feelings and beliefs that justify manipulating all of this. Maybe Zinn really believed what he said, but do you think he did, or was he really a phony and just trying to twist people to his ideology?
Oh, he knew what he was doing. He was doing it deliberately. Mm-hmm. So, he was capable of writing a legitimate book of history. He did it. He turned his dissertation into one, and it won a prize, actually. And I've read part of it, and it is legitimate history. But after that, he wrote no legitimate history. He knew that he was selectively taking quotations and manipulating them to make it appear to be the opposite of what it was. Christopher Columbus's journal, there's an ellipses there. Well, that ellipses indicates 2 days of journal entries that were skipped. So the way Zinn quotes it, you would think that Columbus wanted to just enslave the Indians, that he wanted to work them to death for gold, because what Zinn leaves out is that he believes that they could be won over to the Christian faith through love. He leaves out the word love, that phrase. And so what he does, he takes those kinds of things that writers say and presents them with the critical information left out, or even just maintaining that they say the opposite of what they said.
Mm-hmm. So solutions here. Your book obviously is part of the solution, Professor Grabar. And I should mention the book again, Debunking Howard Zinn, Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America. But it's become so endemic and so ingrained into the American academic scene that, are we too late here? Is there any way to turn it back?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Today's show is brought to you by U.S. Gold Corp. U.S. Gold Corp is a U.S.-focused gold exploration and development company advancing high-potential projects in Wyoming and Nevada. U.S. Gold Corp has consolidated a district on Nevada's productive Cortex trend and is advancing the Copper King project towards production in Wyoming, led by a team of prolific company builders and renowned explorers, including Dave Mathewson, who is directly responsible for several major Nevada gold discoveries. U.S. Gold Corp is well-capitalized and has an extremely tight share structure with less than 20 million shares outstanding and trades on the NASDAQ, a major exchange, under the ticker symbol USAU. To learn more, go to usgoldcorp.gold. That's usgoldcorp.gold.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Well, that's what I'm hoping to do with my book. Up to now, there has been no systematic expose of what Howard Zinn does. There are a lot of people who have fumed against him. They're outraged, but they haven't taken the time to look at his sources, to do the research on their own, and to say this is where he's lying, this is where he's plagiarizing, this is where he's misrepresented what the author really did say. And I've done that with footnotes. The common argument against, critics of Howard Zinn is, well, you're just, a conservative. You disagree with his political views. I mean, that's the argument he had. You don't care about slaves or what happened to women. Well, that's not the case. What I want to show in my book is, what I've done, I believe, in my book is to show objectively how he is manipulating history, that in fact we should object to him, not just because of his anti-Americanism and pro-communism, but because he is a fraudulent historian and he is a propagandist for a communist takeover of the United States.
Yeah, and when you look at what's going on today, Antifa and these millennials, they really don't get what America was all about. They have no concept of history whatsoever, other than America is an exploitative state. And yeah, there's probably a little bit of truth to that, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more good that's been done by the country than isn't. I remember a person I know made a statement, it's a little hyperbole and taken out of context, got into a lot of trouble for it. He basically said, I go to sleep every night thanking God that the white man settled North America and not the blacks from Africa. And, he was lambasted, and I wouldn't go that far. I don't think it's a wise thing to state, and it's kind of meaningless. But the point being that he wasn't so much putting down the blacks as extolling the society, civilization that found, its fertile ground in America, I think is what he was saying. and taken out of context sounds like very racist. But the fact is that the world where it is today, love it or hate it, is largely due to the freedoms enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution, and 150 odd years of jurisprudence till everything kind of fell apart. So one thing, the 60s, okay, when we look at what happened in the 60s, and it's really appropriate that you're releasing this book now on the 50th anniversary of Woodstock, because that kind of was a turning point in the downfall of American society. The family started disintegrating, drug abuse soared, all these bad things happened after Woodstock. So the Woodstock generation, your assessment of the Woodstock musical festival of peace and love and all that stuff.
Well, the major thing that happened was that all the hippie protesters went into academia. They went into education, and they corrupted it and started distorting history, started using it for ideological purposes, weren't being objective. So Zinn, who is older, comes into this milieu. He's sort of leading it and leading the corruption of education and history writing. And so, they were, the tenured radicals. They got tenure. One reason, well, the major reason I no longer teach is I was kicked out of too many colleges because these people are in control. And, you can't, there are no conservative voices to speak of. If there are anywhere, they're marginalized. They don't have power over hiring. They're not on hiring committees. They make less money. And so the radicals that are now in control of the education are just waiting for these people, for the last of them to retire. And so that, in terms of what we're talking about in Howard Zinn, is, the outcome of the 1960s generation. So, I don't know how many of those people wallowing in the mud at Woodstock went on to graduate school, but I'm sure a good percentage did. And they went into the classroom and started spreading their ideas.
Yeah. Well, also, let's not forget that the Vietnam War, which in retrospect, in any historical concept, really bad idea, really failure of American diplomacy based on the perhaps faulty notion of the domino theory that if we let Vietnam fall, the whole of Asia is going to become communist. And, I'm just remembering Eisenhower's warning, beware of the military-industrial complex, all these things. Vietnam, this hippie generation really was a response to this war, which wasn't a war, it was a police action. So, they're not altogether wrong, at least from where they started. I think where they wound up was kind of madness, but Vietnam really was a watershed moment for the culture of the country and led so many people to just rebel against it.
Well, I've done some research on that, and actually, the Communist Party in 1956 was at a crisis point. So you'd had the death of Stalin and the revelations, and they were looking for a new cause, and they saw the civil rights movement. So a number of the old Communist Party members went into the colleges. They went down south. So that's exactly the year that Howard Zinn went to teach at Spelman College in Atlanta. And, he was down there agitating for ostensibly for civil rights, but he was churning the students at the small Christian college for Black women against the administration. And he was encouraging them to be thrown into jail. He avoided it himself as much as he could, unless it was for publicity purposes.
Sure.
And so they latched on to the civil rights movement, but not really for for the sake of civil rights. And then the Vietnam War, Johnson, started sending in troops, and they saw that as a cause. And of course, Howard Zinn and his comrades were rooting for the North Vietnamese. And a lot of those protesters were rooting for the North Vietnamese. Now, I agree with you and a lot of other historians that the war was not conducted in the way it should have been. Mm-hmm. Johnson bungled it. But the protesters, some of them, were sincere, but a lot of them were, supporting Ho Chi Minh, which is what Howard Zinn was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's like the Jane Fonda thing. And it gave them an opportunity, perhaps, that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten. The whole war was based on a lie, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. We know all this now. Just a perfect example of how the government lies. And, the government. My book. That's not true. The Gulf of Tonkin was a lie. We know this. We heard the tapes from the White House, Professor. We know that this attack was a false flag event. But in any event, I don't want to debate the Vietnam War. It just seems like without the Vietnam War, the left would have never gotten the opening that it has now. And, we see these endless wars go on now at this time, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., with no end in sight. So it really does dishearten, I think, a lot of people who don't know the country's history. It's good, the things that the United States has done in the interest of freedom and equality, all these things. Well, hey, the book, again, let's find the name here, because it's long, and it looks like a really great book. Just tell us the name again, Professor.
It is Debunking Howard Zinn, Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America.
And a very worthy tome at that. We really appreciate you coming on. Any questions for the good professor or myself, email us, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. Hey, Professor Grabar, I assume it's on Amazon. You have a website where people can connect with you?
Yes, I run Dissident Prof, so www.dissidentprof.com, marygrabar.com. It's on Amazon, at Regnery, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, any place you can buy books.
Hey, well, really appreciate you coming on. Great luck with the book. It's much needed, and hopefully it's not too little too late.
Great, thank you.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.